The auction yard smelled of dust, sweat, and forgotten promises. Sunlight poured through the broken slats of the barn roof, casting harsh stripes over tired animals and even more tired men. The crowd, small and indifferent, murmured with the casual cruelty of habit. Bored farmers, young men looking for cheap stock, and old-timers who came more for the spectacle than the trade. Among them stood a man who didn't belong. Thomas Briggs leaned against a splintered post, his arms folded, his hat pulled low to shade a face carved by time. His jacket hung off him like a memory, worn and patched, and his boots had the gait of too many miles. His eyes, though dulled by the weight of years, scanned the pens with a strange patience, as if he wasn't looking to buy, but to remember. He didn't speak. He rarely did anymore. The auctioneer's voice cracked over the loudspeaker, half drunk and half bored. "Next one's a real heartbreaker," he bellowed. "Grade gelding. 14 hands. Scarred, skittish, and stubborn as sin. Starting at 20, do I hear 20? The crowd shuffled, unimpressed. The horse was let out, if one could call it that. He moved slowly, limping on his left front leg. His coat was the color of weathered copper, patchy and dull. His ribs showed like bowed rafters beneath sagging skin. A long scar ran diagonally from shoulder to belly, and one of his ears was torn at the edge. His eyes, one deep brown, the other milky with blindness, searched the crowd without hope. 10 then. $10. The auctioneer tried again. "Come on now. Surely someone wants a fixer-upper." Laughter rippled through the barn. A young man with a beer in his hand hollered, "I'll give you 5 if he comes with glue." The auctioneer smirked, but even he seemed embarrassed. All right. Let's not be cruel. We'll start at $1. Final offer. Anyone?" No one moved. Not until Thomas shifted his weight and lifted one hand, as casually as if he were brushing dust off his sleeve. The auctioneer blinked. "We got $1. Sold." Heads turned. Murmurs stirred. One woman whispered to another, "Isn't that Briggs? Thought he lost his ranch." Thomas ignored them. He stepped forward and took the rope from the handler without a word. The horse didn't resist. He didn't move much at all, in fact. Just stood there, head low, as if expecting nothing and receiving exactly that. The crowd parted for him, eyes following. Someone chuckled. That horse is worth exactly what he paid for him. Another voice added, "And that old man ain't worth much more." Thomas led the horse out of the yard, not fast, not slow, just steady. The sun hit the horizon behind them, casting long shadows across the gravel. They walked in silence. The truck waited on the edge of town. Thomas had borrowed it from Jeannie, the widow who ran the post office and baked too much bread. She hadn't asked what he needed it for. She rarely did. Sometimes kindness doesn't come with questions. At the truck, Thomas opened the ramp and paused. He looked the horse in the eye, what was left of it. The gelding flinched, but didn't pull away. "Not much of a greeting," Thomas murmured, "but I've had worse." He coaxed the horse up the ramp with soft clicks and patience. No whip, no shouts, just space and time. And somehow, the broken animal responded. He stepped into the trailer like he remembered doing it once before. The ride home was quiet. The engine rattled, and Thomas hummed an old tune he barely recalled the lyrics to. His hands, lined and cracked, stayed firm on the wheel. Outside, the fields rolled by like waves of faded gold. Inside the trailer, Dusty shifted now and then, his hooves thunking gently on the floorboards. Thomas's land wasn't what it used to be. The barn was sagging, the fences half rotten, and the pasture grown wild. But the water trough still held clean spring water, and the old stall, though crooked, was dry. He parked and walked to the trailer door. The sun had dipped low, and crickets were tuning their night songs. He opened the ramp and stepped aside. "Come on, boy. You're home. For now, at least." The horse hesitated. Then, slowly, painfully, he descended the ramp, his hooves crunching gravel. He sniffed the air, paused, walked forward. Thomas watched him move, noting the limp, the guarded steps, the flinching at shadows. This was no blank slate. This horse had been somewhere, known someone, been ruined by them. He led the gelding to the stall and closed the gate. The horse turned once, then lowered his head to sniff the straw. He didn't eat, just stood there. Thomas leaned against the door and rubbed his hands together. "You're not the only one who's been left behind," he said softly. In the tack room, he rummaged through old boxes, found a brush, a blanket, an old halter, frayed at the edges. He brought them out and stood by the stall, but didn't go in. Not yet. It was too soon for trust. He watched the horse for a long while, watched as the animal stood in the dimming light, neither sleeping nor settling, just waiting, as if unsure whether to hope or brace for the next blow. Thomas finally turned in for the night. He didn't lock the barn. He never did. What would be the point? If the horse wanted to leave, he'd find a way. And if he didn't, well, maybe there was still something left to build. Inside the house, Thomas lit a lamp and sat at the table. On the wall hung a faded photograph, a girl no older than 16, grinning atop a tall black stallion. Her hair was wind-tossed, her eyes bright with challenge. He hadn't seen her in over a decade. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, lukewarm now, and stared at the photo. "You'd laugh at me, wouldn't you?" he said aloud. $1 for a half-dead horse. Just like old times. The wind moaned outside, gentle but persistent. He sipped the coffee and listened. Then, from the barn, came the sound of a single hoof striking wood. Not a panic, not a kick, just a tap. Like a question being asked. Thomas smiled, just barely. "Well," he muttered, "maybe we both made a bad deal." But he didn't believe it. Not really. Because deep down, in the hollow he hadn't touched in years, something stirred, something shaped like purpose. And just outside, in the dark, a broken horse stood quietly in a stranger's stall, not running, not resisting, just waiting. The morning came wrapped in fog. A damp gray clung to the fields and settled along the broken fence line. Thomas stepped out onto the porch with a slow, deliberate breath, the warmth of his coffee mug heating the calloused palms that had once built barns and mended bridles. Now they trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from something older than age. Doubt. He walked toward the barn with a limp of his own. His left knee had never fully healed after the fall 5 winters ago. But today, it ached less than usual. Or maybe he simply didn't notice. The thought of what waited in the stall pulled his focus too tightly. Dusty stood where he'd been left, unmoved. He hadn't touched the hay. The water bucket was untouched too, save for a few strands of floating straw. His head lifted slightly at the sound of footsteps, but didn't rise all the way. There was no fear, no hope, only waiting. Thomas unlatched the stall door and stepped inside slowly, not hiding his movements, but not forcing them either. He crouched down, not low, but enough to break his silhouette. "All right, partner," he said softly. "It's day 1. Let's see where it takes us." He reached for the brush, a wooden one with worn bristles that had once known a champion quarter horse. Dusty shifted but didn't move away. The brush touched his shoulder. There was a flinch, a shudder, then stillness. With each stroke, a layer of dried mud and shame lifted away. Beneath it, the faint glint of a coat that had once shimmered with life. Thomas didn't speak much. Horses didn't need words. They needed time. He brushed until the shoulder was clean, then moved carefully toward the neck. Dusty's ear twitched but stayed down. A good sign. It became a rhythm. Mornings with a brush, evenings with slow walks in the pasture. The rope held loose, but never dropped. The gelding didn't bolt. He didn't run. He simply followed, each step cautious but willing. Each day, a little more life returned to his limbs. The limp persisted, but it softened. On the 5th day, Thomas brought an old saddle out of storage. It was cracked in places, the leather dry, but not broken. He didn't try to fit it on Dusty yet. Instead, he laid it near the fence and let the horse sniff it. Dusty approached slowly, nostrils flaring. "Not rushing you," Thomas murmured. "Just reminding you." That night, he sat with Jeannie at her kitchen table, a plate of cornbread between them and the smell of stew still clinging to the air. "You're really doing it, aren't you?" she asked, watching him more than his words. "I'm not sure what I'm doing," he said, "but he's not afraid of me. That's a start. He trusts you. He doesn't trust me yet. He tolerates me. There's a difference." Jeannie sipped her tea. "Funny," Sounds like how you treat people. Thomas smirked but said nothing. Back home, he opened the barn door quietly. Dusty was lying down for the first time. Resting, not collapsed. He looked up but didn't rise. Thomas stood for a moment, then turned away and closed the door behind him, his chest tight with something he didn't dare name. It felt too much like hope. The next morning, Thomas walked into town with a list in his pocket. Ointment for cracked hooves. A new curry comb. Feed that didn't taste like gravel. The clerk raised a brow at the list. You getting back into horses, Briggs? I'm getting back into something, he replied. On his way out, he passed by the local bulletin board. Flyers for church events, lost dogs, and one advertisement stood out. A small local show, 2 towns over. Mostly kids, hobbyists. Nothing serious, but open entries welcome. He stared at the flyer longer than he meant to. That night, he carried a flake of alfalfa to the barn. Dusty met him halfway across the stall. Not a rush, but a few steps. Enough to be noticed. Thomas grinned. Figured out what I smell like, huh? He set the hay down gently. Dusty nudged it, then began to eat. Not greedily, but with quiet interest. You keep this up, Thomas said, voice nearly a whisper, and folks'll think I paid too much for you. The days blended, but each brought something new. Dusty followed without the rope now. He accepted the saddle blanket, then the saddle itself. No panic, no bucking. Just tension, then calm. As if he was remembering how to be a horse again. And Thomas, he was changing too. His mornings came earlier. His steps grew surer. The hollow in his chest didn't feel so wide. He started talking more, mostly to Dusty. About the weather, the past. About nothing at all. Used to be good at this, he said one day as he cleaned a saddle buckle. Back when I thought life made sense. Back before everything frayed at the edges. Dusty looked over from the trough, ears half forward. Thomas sighed. You don't care about all that, do you? You just want me to feed you. The gelding blinked slowly. It felt like agreement. Then came the first test. A truck backfired on the road near the barn. The noise cracked through the air like a shot. Dusty panicked, kicking, spinning, eyes wide with terror. He slammed into the stall wall, nearly toppling the water bucket. Thomas rushed in, arms raised, not to grab, but to slow. Easy, easy. His voice stayed level. Dusty spun once more, then stopped, panting, trembling. Thomas moved in, not touching, just being close. He waited until the horse turned his head, just a little. A flicker of awareness. There you go, Thomas whispered. Storms passed. It wasn't just fear. That kind of reaction came from history, not instinct. Somewhere, someone had scared this horse senseless. Maybe more than once. The realization hardened something inside Thomas. He wasn't just rehabbing a tired gelding. He was reclaiming something that had been stolen. 2 days later, Jeannie stopped by with a surprise. She handed him the flyer. Thought this might interest you. He glanced down. Same small-town horse show. Date circled in pen. Don't be ridiculous, he said. I'm not. You are. You 2VE come farther than anyone thought. Thomas looked toward the barn, where Dusty stood at the gate, waiting for him. He's not ready. Maybe not, but maybe you are. That night, Thomas walked the perimeter of the pasture, Dusty trailing behind. The stars blinked above, cool and quiet. You think we've got one good ride left in us? He asked the dark. The horse didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Morning light spilled across the pasture like liquid gold. Dust clung to the air as Thomas guided Dusty in slow, looping circles around the outer fence line. The gelding's movements were smoother now, more confident, though the limp still lingered. It was less pronounced, a reminder, not a sentence. Thomas watched his gait with quiet scrutiny, noting each wince, each hesitation. They had come far, but the question lingered in Thomas's mind, unspoken but constant. How far was far enough? Jeannie stood near the fence, arms folded, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. She hadn't said much since arriving, but her presence was steady. She understood horses, and perhaps even more than that, she understood broken things, how they mend, and how they don't. He's moving better, she finally said. Thomas gave a short nod. Pain's still there, but he's pushing through. Like someone else I know. He didn't respond. Instead, he clicked his tongue and gave Dusty a gentle tug. The horse stopped, turned slightly, and looked at him. Really looked at him. That connection, however brief, was all the answer Thomas needed. Later, in the barn, Thomas unbuckled the saddle and slid it off Dusty's back. He ran a hand down the horse's side, feeling the muscle that had once been wasted, now returning in quiet defiance of the odds. Dusty stood still, his breath deep and slow. "You've got it in you," Thomas said. "Just gotta prove it to them." But deep down, Thomas wasn't sure who needed proving, Dusty or himself. Back inside the house, he sat at the worn kitchen table with the flyer in front of him. It was crinkled now, stained at the edge from his thumb pressing the same corner over and over. The local horse show was 3 days away. Small-time event. Mostly young riders, hobbyists. Still, it drew a crowd. And word had spread about the man who'd bought a horse for $1 and brought him back from ruin. Thomas knew the whispers were traveling. He could feel them gathering like storm clouds. The night before the show, Thomas couldn't sleep. He paced the porch with a mug of tea in hand, watching the moon drift in and out of clouds. The house creaked around him, full of memories and empty rooms. He thought of the photograph again, his daughter and her horse, both long gone. "You'd have told me to go for it," he said to the dark. "You always believed in the ones nobody else did." In the barn, Dusty shuffled in his stall. Thomas went to him, brushing down his coat in the low lamplight. The air smelled of hay and liniment, and something else, nerves. "You ready, boy?" he asked. Dusty didn't answer, but he leaned into the brush, just slightly. They left at dawn. The drive was quiet. The trailer rattled, and the road unspooled beneath the tires, like a ribbon of doubt and determination. Jeannie rode along, her hands folded in her lap, eyes steady on the horizon. At the event grounds, chaos reigned. Trailers pulled in from all directions. Children laughed, dogs barked, and riders in crisp outfits brushed spotless ponies. Dusty, in contrast, stood tall but plain. His coat had been brushed until it gleamed, but the scars remained. They always would. Thomas led him to a quiet patch under a tree and began to saddle up. People stared, some in recognition, others in amusement. He heard the whispers. "That's the $1 horse. Poor guy must be trying to prove something." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Dusty's ears twitched but didn't lay back. His eyes flicked around, not wild but aware. "He's holding it together," Jeannie said. "He'll be fine," Thomas replied, but his jaw was tight. They waited until nearly last to enter. The arena loomed larger than it should have. Dust swirled in the breeze. Announcers called names over the speakers. Music played between events, and judges sat beneath white tents, scribbling in notebooks. When their name was called, Thomas Briggs and Dusty. There was a pause. Then a few polite claps. Thomas took a deep breath, adjusted the reins, and stepped into the ring. Dusty followed with cautious steps. The gates closed behind them, and the noise of the crowd dulled to a low hum. The moment stretched, sharp and breathless. Thomas gave the cue. Dusty moved. It wasn't perfect. His first few steps were stiff, his limp briefly visible. But then, like someone shaking off sleep, he stretched into the motion. He turned, trotted, pivoted. They moved together, slow and smooth. Nothing flashy, but something more rare. Harmony. Thomas felt it in his bones, in the quiet rhythm between his touch and Dusty's response. It was more than training. It was trust. The crowd grew quiet. No one laughed. No one mocked. They watched. Dusty finished the course with a final tight turn and came to a stop in the center of the arena. Thomas dismounted slowly, knees aching but heart pounding. There was silence. Then a single clap. Then another. And then more, rising like a slow tide until the entire crowd stood applauding. Not for perfection, but for something far more profound. Redemption. Thomas stood by Dusty's side, his hand resting against the gelding's neck. He didn't smile. He simply breathed, eyes flicking toward the stands, scanning faces he didn't know for something that might matter. That's when he saw her, his daughter, standing at the edge of the crowd, her eyes wet, hands trembling at her sides. She hadn't been part of his world in years, but now here she was. Their eyes met, just for a second. 1,000 words passed between them. The awards didn't matter. Dusty didn't place in the top 3. But the judges shook Thomas's hand. Writers approached and asked questions. A reporter jotted down notes. And still, his daughter remained, half-hidden, unsure. Later, in the trailer lot, she approached. Thomas was brushing down Dusty, humming an old tune under his breath. "You kept the song," she said. He turned slowly. His mouth opened, but no words came. She walked closer. "Mom used to sing it while she braided my hair. I remembered it when I saw you in there. Saw you and him." Thomas lowered the brush. "Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to come." She looked at Dusty. "He's beautiful. And brave. He's something, all right." She stepped forward, laid a hand on the horse's neck. Dusty didn't flinch. "He reminds me of you," she whispered. Thomas looked at her, not as a stranger, not as a ghost from his past, but as someone returning. Maybe we both had a little more left in us than we thought. They stood in silence, father, daughter, and the $1 horse. And in that moment, without ribbons or fanfare, something long broken began to mend. The morning after the show came quietly. No parade, no trophies. Just the soft rustle of wind through pasture grass, and the creak of old wood as Thomas opened the barn doors. Dusty stood where he always did, head lowered but alert, ears flicking at the distant coo of doves nesting in the rafters. The faint light spilled across his coat, which now shone in patches, where once it had been dull and cracked. His limp remained, but there was grace to it now, a rhythm learned through survival. Thomas stepped into the stall with the same quiet steps he always used. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. He ran a hand along Dusty's neck, fingers brushing against the scarred skin with something close to reverence. Dusty shifted his weight and leaned in slightly, a small gesture, but meaningful. They had not won the competition, but winning had never been the point. Later that morning, Thomas drove into town. He needed feed, supplies, maybe some repair lumber for the sagging east fence. But more than that, he was driven by a feeling he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, however faint. As he pulled up outside the feed store, he noticed a few people glance his way. Not with ridicule, but recognition. He nodded at a pair of ranchers on the porch. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with tobacco-stained teeth, gave a small wave. "You and that horse turned some heads yesterday," he said. Thomas shrugged. "He's got heart. That's what counts." Inside, the clerk handed him a folded newspaper along with his order slip. "You're on page 3, she said with a grin. He unfolded it on the hood of his truck. There it was, a grainy photo of Dusty Midtrot, his head high and ears pricked forward. The headline read, $1 horse, $1 million heart. He stared at it longer than necessary. Not for pride, but for confirmation. It was real. People had seen it, understood it. Back at the farm, Jeannie waited near the gate, a paper bag in one hand, her eyes scanning the road. "He made the news," Thomas said as he got out. "I know. Half the town's talking about it." She handed him the bag. Inside was a pair of new riding gloves and a jar of liniment. Thomas blinked down at the contents, then back up at her. "Don't get sentimental on me," she said. They were on sale. That night, Thomas stood on the porch as the sky darkened. Fireflies blinked across the fields like tiny, scattered stars. The day had been long, but there was no exhaustion in his bones. Just a quiet, full stillness. He turned as footsteps approached. His daughter, Sarah, walked up the gravel path, her denim jacket slung over one shoulder. She looked unsure, as if testing the air for permission. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she replied. He stepped aside and gestured toward the rocking chair beside his. She sat. For a while, they didn't speak. The crickets filled the silence. Then, softly, she said, "You looked different yesterday. Like yourself again." He gave a short laugh. "Hadn't felt like myself in a long time." "I'm sorry I stayed away so long," she added. "After Mom, after everything, I didn't know how to come back." Thomas nodded slowly. "Neither did I. But that horse, he taught me something. Or maybe reminded me. She glanced toward the barn. He's still limping. He always will, he said, but he moves forward anyway. They sat a while longer, side by side, saying little but sharing much. The next morning brought change. Not sudden or dramatic, but meaningful. Thomas stood in the barn with a clipboard in hand. Sarah leaned against the stall door, watching as he checked off items on a handwritten list. "You're really starting a rescue?" she asked. "Not a big one, but enough. A few horses at a time. One's like Dusty. One's no one wants." She smiled. "You'll need help." He looked at her, surprised, then smiled back. "That's so. I've still got my old boots," she said. "Might be time to dust them off." The days that followed were filled with work, real, sweaty, honest work. Fencing was repaired, stalls cleaned. A small sign was painted by hand and nailed to the post by the driveway. Second Chance Acres. Word spread quickly. First came inquiries. Then the first rescue. An old mare left tied to a tree, her coat matted, her eyes wild with distrust. She was given a stall beside Dusty. He greeted her with a quiet snort, and she, surprisingly, didn't turn away. Thomas watched the exchange with a knowing nod. "Takes one to understand one," he said. Sarah built a small website. Jeannie brought over extra feed from her late husband's and used stockpile. Local kids began visiting after school, curious and eager to help. And always, Dusty remained the heart of it all. Each morning, he would stand at the gate, waiting for Thomas, with the quiet patience of something healed but still healing. His steps remained careful, but there was strength behind them now. Then came the letter. A man from a distant county, an old show trainer, had read about Dusty. He had a stable full of horses, he said, but none with the heart he'd seen in that picture. He offered a price, a high one. Thomas read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it away in a drawer. That evening, standing beside Dusty, he said, "You're worth more than $1 now, boy, but you're not for sale. Not ever." Dusty nuzzled his chest, and Thomas let his hand rest over the scar on the gelding's shoulder. "You were never broken," he said quietly. "You were just waiting for someone to see you." By summer's end, the pasture was full, 5 horses, each with stories written in bone and bruises. Some were skittish, others angry, but all were learning, step by patient step, to trust again. And Thomas, he walked among them no longer as a man lost in his past, but as one firmly rooted in purpose. Some nights he would sit on the porch with Sarah beside him, the stars wheeling above in their slow, ancient dance. He didn't need applause. He didn't need ribbons or headlines. All he needed was the sound of hooves in the grass, the warmth of family returned, and the quiet certainty that, for as long as he could, he would keep choosing the forgotten. Because once he had been one of them, and someone somewhere, maybe a horse with cloudy eyes and a limp, had chosen him back.